Hello, in today's cosplay video, we're going to be making the tunic for Vex from the Legend of Vox Machina. For Vex's tunic, I'm using two stretch twills that I got from Joann's, a aqua color for the main part of the tunic, and then a navy for the facing and the sleeves. The pattern I'm using for Vex's tunic is from Indigo Patterns on Etsy. And this is a digital pattern, so you do have to assemble it yourself. And the first step is to print out the page that has the key on it, make sure that the box is to scale, then go and print all the rest of the pieces to make sure everything is the right size. I should mention that this pattern does come with instructions with pictures, but I may be deviating from that just a little bit. So you then print out all of the pieces, line up the diamonds, tape it together, and cut it out. The tunic ended up being a little long on me, so I trimmed off some from the bottom of both the back and the front pieces. Sew the side front tunic pieces to the front tunic pieces. Sew the tunic side back pieces to the tunic back. Sew the front and back tunic pieces together along the shoulder seams. One alteration that I'm going to be doing that is not mentioned in the pattern instructions is adding some way to attach other pieces of the costume. So I took some of the blue fabric, sewed a tube, turned it right side out, and then top stitched along it, and then I folded it through a slide adjuster and sewed it in place, and I'm going to do the same thing with a D-ring. I then sewed the pieces to the neckline of the tunic. I used the slide adjuster on the side that's going to have her fur pauldron, and then the D-ring is closer towards the back, and this is going to be for attaching her quiver, because in the show it just kind of magically appears on her back and then disappears depending on the situation. So this way I don't have to add any more straps. It can just clip on to the tunic itself, and I plan on adding another one to the corset and have it go across the back like this. Now the side that her quiver is on varies. It's usually the fur is on one side and then the quiver is on the other. And I don't know if they did this for symmetry for the character design, but she's right-handed, so sometimes on the action figure, her quiver will also be on this side so that she can be posed as if she's about to draw an arrow out of the quiver. So you can go either way. I'm going to be doing it this way, but you can put them wherever you want. Sew the tunic side front lining pieces to the tunic front lining. Sew the front lining pieces to the front facing. The instructions call for interfacing the facing. However, I am using a stretch fabric and I don't have any stretch interfacing, so I am going to omit that part and hopefully it won't be an issue. Sew the side back pieces of the tunic lining to the tunic lining back piece. Then we're going to take the back facing piece and sew in the darts that are marked on the pattern. Sew the tunic back lining to the back facing. Sew the front and back lining pieces together as well along the shoulder seams. The pattern itself says to cut interfacing for the dark blue collar piece. However, the instructions that come with the pattern says to use interfacing on the light blue collar, so that's what I did for mine. Putting right sides together, sew the collar onto the neckline of the tunic. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the dark blue collar piece to the neckline of the lining tunic piece. cut 4 of the sleeve pieces out of the dark blue fabric, and on 2 of them we're going to apply some interfacing, and on the corresponding other 2 pieces we're going to trim off just a little bit from the side that does not have the notches on it to make it a little bit smaller than the interface sleeve. Putting the right sides together, we're going to sew a non-interfaced to interfaced sleeve piece together along the side that does not have the notches. Open up the sleeve and sew the seam allowance to the non-interfaced side. Then we're going to fold the sleeve back in half and press it flat. I also found it easier to sew a line of stitching along the edge before pressing it, and because the inner side is slightly smaller and also because of the stitching, it's going to encourage the lining to stay underneath and not be visible. Sew the sleeves to the outer tunic. Putting right sides together, sew the front of the tunic to the tunic lining, starting from the zipper start point, going up around the collar and back down to the other zipper start point. The pattern instructions called for edge stitching along the turquoise part of the fabric, and I struggled with this, especially around the corners, so I just sewed the edge stitching like on the side, skipped around the corners, did along the back, and then skipped the corner again because I just couldn't maneuver it around through my sewing machine. Hopefully it looks okay. They're a little wobbly, but it is what it is. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the lining and the outer portion of the tunic together along the armholes. Turn the tunic right side out, and the instructions call for edge stitching the armhole. Again, I had a hard time manipulating it through my machine, so I just sewed the edge stitching up until the sleeve on both sides. Then we're going to sew an invisible zipper just into the top layer of the tunic. Putting right sides together, we're going to take the lining part of the tunic, and where it would meet the bottom part of the zipper, we're going to sew from that point to the bottom of the tunic. Again, we're going to turn the tunic inside out, and we're going to match up the side seams. So the tunic lining seams match together and the outer seams match together, and sew the sides together. Turn the tunic right side out, and we're going to sew the lining to the outer part of the tunic all around the bottom edge. I did have some trouble with this because for some reason this panel warped a bit. I'm not sure why. It somehow ended up longer than the rest of the pieces, and it did have some wrinkling here. So it's not perfect. I had to rip out those stitches and do it again. And the second time I pinned the 2 pieces together while they were on my dress form, and that did help some of the problem. To finish off the bottom raw edge of the tunic, we're going to bind the edge in bias tape. You could use purchase bias tape, but I made some out of the same fabric so that it would match. To finish off the inside of the lining, I folded the raw edge inward and sewed it by hand to the zipper. That way, none of the stitches will show on the outside. And with that, Vex's tunic is done. For Vex's fur pauldron thing, I made my own pattern out of wrapping paper and then pinned it onto the dress form to test it out. And I think that'll work pretty well. So now I'll go ahead and cut it out of the fake fur. To cut out the fur pieces, I find it easier to transfer the pattern design to the back of the fabric, then use either an X-Acto knife or a small pair of scissors and cut just the backing. We're not going to cut straight through the fur because then you're going to end up with this choppy look. So just snip through the backing and then you'll end up with a piece where the fur looks a bit more natural. Putting right sides together, we're going to sew the fur pieces together along the side seam. To attach the pauldron to the tunic, I made another tube of the blue fabric, folded over the ends, sewed them into place, and then added some Velcro so that it will stay in place when folded in half. To finish off the edges, I sewed a hem along the outer edge using a whip stitch, and also used a whip stitch to tack down the seam allowance. I hand sewed the Velcro piece to the underside of the pauldron. Now it can attach to the tunic through the slide adjuster. I may go and add some snaps or maybe just even pin it later on, but for now I think it looks good. This video is already getting kind of long, so I'm going to stop here now that we have a good tunic base, and tomorrow's video will be making the corset to go with it. So stay tuned and subscribe for that.